Aloha, I'm Sabrina with Begin Being, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the importance of vulnerability. We're going to be talking about how it can actually be detrimental to you if you are not willing and open and vulnerable. We're willing to be vulnerable. We're going to talk to you about what exactly vulnerability is and the difference between being truly vulnerable and just like surface level vulnerable. And also the difference between being vulnerable and being stuck in an old store that's no longer serving you. And also how to be vulnerable and how to support others in being vulnerable as well. So I've actually been working a lot on the concept of vulnerability myself, because I used to think that being vulnerable was scary. I used to think that it wasn't safe. I used to think that if I'm vulnerable, then I'm going to be seen as weak. If I'm vulnerable, then I can't help take care of others. Like, I need to be strong. I need to be brave. I need to be someone who doesn't let their shit get in the way so that I can help someone else. So I used to have a lot of fears around vulnerability. And the interesting thing is, I didn't even know it. So I was being like surface level vulnerable. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, you can ask me any question and I'll answer you, which was true. So if you directly asked me a question, I would answer you, and I'm like, oh, I'm opening up and being vulnerable. And I was being very surface level vulnerable. I wasn't like lying, or I wasn't, making anything up or anything like that. I was just telling a very surface level answer and not actually answering the deeper level, which was the true answer to the questions. So sometimes we can get caught up in that feeling of, well, if I really say what I'm thinking, that's not going to make me feel safe, or the person's going to judge me, or then I'm not going to be seen as strong, and then I might be seen as weak, and either they're going to take advantage of me or maybe I can't help them. So I had a lot of stuff that happened to me as a child, and I kind of talked about it a little bit in another video. And then I recently took, it was like a $16,000 training where you really dig into all of your stuff. You really dig into everything that's going on in an area of your life, and that way you're able to excel. That way you're able to get rid of all of the stories, all of the ick that's in there. And during that process, I really realized, and I had people telling me this, like, Sabrina, when you're on stage, I do live events, so getting feedback and stuff, like when you're on stage, it's like you're not opening up. It's like you're not really allowing people to see you. And I kind of was noticing this, and I'm like, okay, I thought I was though. And to me, the things that I was doing, I thought I was speaking from my heart, which I was. I just wasn't like completely opening up. And like I said, I had that feedback given to me, and I'm like, okay, well, why is it? What is it that I'm doing? And like, why am I doing this? And so really digging into what all of that was. And fast forward, I've recently gotten into a relationship, and I had an absolutely amazing experience. Well, a couple different things have happened. That is one of them. And so he says to me at one point, he opens up and he shares something that's very like vulnerable to him. And in that moment, I was in my head like recognizing, oh my goodness, here he is like sharing this thing that was vulnerable to him with me. Here he is opening up, and he's like giving me the space to be able to, respond and to be able to like kind of help him navigate what he was going through. And at the same time, I was feeling like similar feelings. And with him though, because in that moment, it was like about him, and I didn't want to be like, oh yeah, me too. I didn't want to take away from his experience. And so I waited until a little bit later. I was like, okay, I'm actually feeling vulnerable in a very similar way to what he was experiencing. And so I kind of like paused what I wanted to tell him in the moment. And later on, a few days later, something came up, and I was like, oh, this is a good time to be able to share, hey, I'm actually feeling the same way. And there's a couple things that happen with this, is that for one, I was able to recognize in someone when like they're being vulnerable with me and how much it meant to me. Because since he shared that with me, I was able to like reassure him about something, and I was able to like then know how he's feeling deep inside. I was able to know like, okay, these are his true feelings. And I started to recognize, I'm like, wait, if he hadn't have shared that, then I wouldn't have known. And I in no way at any time when he was sharing, I in no way thought, oh, bro, that's so weak. Like, really? Come on, you're a man. Like, what are you doing, right? I in no way at any point thought that. However, with me previously, since I didn't feel like it was safe to be vulnerable, that's kind of how I like projected that people would think about me. It's not true though. And so with doing all of this work on being vulnerable and opening myself up to be more vulnerable, I was able to recognize, here's this person being vulnerable, and I thought it was amazing. I thought it was absolutely amazing that he was able to do that. And then, like I said, a couple of days later, I shared a very similar thing with him, and he's like, oh babe, like, please, I want you to share that in the moment. I want you to share that now. Like, please don't hold on to this. And I told him, I was like, well, it's not that I was holding on to it. I just wanted to like focus on you in the moment. And he's like, no, it's okay. Like, you can share too. And so it was just a really amazing experience to be able to have that with him. And I was able to share something with him at what I thought was the appropriate time, but it turns out there is no appropriate time. It's share when it's on your mind, share when it's in your heart. And what I found out when I did share with him, yeah, it opened up this two-way communication to be able to share our vulnerable pieces so that we can support each other in that. Another thing that happened is, like I said, I do live events, and one of the events that we did after the training that I was talking to you about earlier, one of the events that we did is a live plus virtual. So we do a training where everybody's live, everybody's in the live room, and we broadcast that live training on Zoom. And so then there's people all around the world watching the Zoom part of it. Well, I was in the room with another trainer. I was in the Zoom room, because we have everybody like in one room going live, and then we have another like room that it just supports the Zoom group. So me and another trainer were in the Zoom room, and we're on Zoom and everything, and one of the students asked her a very personal question. And the question that they asked, she really could have answered it more surface level, but instead she started answering kind of on the surface, and then she went deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where like everybody was tearing up, like people, because we can see them all on their camera. And so people are like tearing up, and she's tearing up, and I'm tearing up. And before in the past, I would have thought like, oh my goodness, what if people see that she's weak? But what if they start thinking she's weak? What if they start thinking like she can't like, you know, be a trainer in this training? That would have been like my past thoughts. And instead in that moment, I was able to witness her being open and vulnerable with not only like herself, with me, with the entire group worldwide that we had in our Zoom. And I was like, wow, this is actually powerful. It's not weak, it's strong, it's powerful. Weak is like just hitting that surface level. It takes strength to be able to go down into the deep stuff. It takes strength to be able to like cry in front of a worldwide audience. That was powerful. That was strength. And so I've had a lot of these experiences since then. I've also started sharing from stage some of the stuff I shared in a video about stuff that happened to me when I was a kid. For example, I wasn't allowed to tell people what my mom did for a living. And no, she wasn't a secret agent or anything like that. She just did something that most people would judge. And so I had to lie what she did for a living. I would tell people that she was a waitress who worked nights. And through that, there was also things to where the people that she was around in that time period, I went to several different babysitters and experienced different sexual abuse. And her boyfriend at the time as well was very physically, mentally, emotionally abusive to both of us. I had to call the cops on him multiple times, stuff like that. And before, like sharing this with you now, I'm like, oh yeah, whatever, that happened. But before, that would have been no. There would have been no way I would have let anybody know this except for like maybe, deep, close people. And there are some people, some friends in my life who, yeah, they never even knew. And being able to speak about this though, I've spoken about this at trainings now, and now I get people coming up to me saying, hey, I had a similar experience. And because the trainings that I do, they're all involved in personal growth and development, I'm now able to communicate with other people who've had these experiences, and they're able to let it go. They're able to release it. They're able to say yes, this happened to me. This doesn't have to be who I am though. This doesn't have to be a part of, I don't have to be a victim, basically. They don't have to play that victim card anymore. So had all of these things happen, and had I not shared this with the group, then students wouldn't be coming up to me saying, wow, thank you. It's never it makes it okay. It's never oh yeah, that was fine, totally. What it does is it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to be able to say okay, this happened, now let's heal. Now let's move forward, instead of keeping it this dirty little secret in the closet where you never talk about it. So those are just some of the reasons why it's not only important to be vulnerable, like I said, it can be detrimental if you're not vulnerable. For example, if the person that I started dating, if he hadn't opened up and shared that, then maybe I wouldn't have opened up and shared. Or maybe I would have shared, but it wouldn't have been that two-way flow. Because we were both able to open up and share something that was vulnerable for both of us, it made our relationship stronger. And had that not happened, we might be both in our stuff thinking about these different things that weren't even true. It's sometimes your monkey mind gets to chattering and it gets to going, and it's oh yeah, this is a story over here, play out this story. But if you talk, if you communicate, if you open up to somebody, the story no longer exists. This story, it's and here's the thing, so both of us, we've both done a lot of personal growth and development. So both of us knew this little thing that we were being vulnerable about, we both knew that it wasn't actually true. And I'll go ahead and share mine. So mine was about being good enough. Am I good enough for this person? So, and I didn't ask him if I can share his. Maybe I should have thought about that before filming. But mine was about being vulnerable, when I was being vulnerable with him, it was about, am I good enough for him? And in this particular way, not in general, but there was a particular way I'm ooh, man, he's got this going on. Am I good enough for that? And I knew that was just my monkey mind chattering. I knew it wasn't true. I knew he wouldn't actually think that. But like I said, sometimes we just play these little stories in our head and we're okay, I know this isn't true. And it's just a little bit of a feeling that comes up. Because we were both able to be vulnerable and open with each other, I was able to share with him, okay, well, there's something I'm feeling vulnerable, or something I'm feeling as well. And there's there's in this particular area, I feel what if I'm not good enough for you? And of course, it wasn't true. Of course, he didn't have any of those feelings. I didn't have any of the feelings about the thing that he was feeling vulnerable about either. But we were able to have that conversation. If we were in this relationship and we were both thinking those different things, those untrue thoughts, then what could have happened is they could have festered and they could have grown. And there's a thing called your reticular activating system, your RAS. And what that is that whenever you are thinking about something, concentrating on something, say for example, I give an example in a different video about a Tesla. I just use that because it's a pretty common car. So say you're wanting a Tesla and you're thinking about the Tesla, and all of a sudden your RAS gets activated and you start seeing Teslas everywhere. And you're oh my gosh, I never noticed there were so many Teslas. How everybody's buying a Tesla. Well, they're really not. It's just simply your RAS got activated and now you're seeking that. It's an information seeker, and it goes out and seeks information. So that's kind of, it can happen in a positive way, especially if you're trying to manifest something, other videos on that. But it can also happen in a negative way, to where now you're searching for something that isn't positive. So for example, had I not, been vulnerable with him and said, well, I'm kind of feeling something that's a little bit vulnerable too. I'm kind of feeling like, in this particular area, like you are just amazing. Like you are incredible in this part of your life. And I kind of feel like I've got a lot of work to do in that area. And I feel like there's that feeling of not feeling good enough for you in that particular area. And so what can happen though, is had I not had that conversation with him and he gives me the reassurance of like, no babe, that's a total story. That's not real. He doesn't feel that way at all. If that hadn't happened, then what could have happened is my RAS gets activated. And then I start seeing little things. I start seeing more and more like things about, oh, well, here's another example of why I'm not. Here's another example of why I'm not. Here's another example of, I think this might be true now. So it can move from a thought of, I know this really isn't true, to a thought of, well, maybe, to a thought of, oh yeah, I think this actually is true. Now, if you are doing a bunch of personal growth and development work, hopefully it wouldn't actually get that far. And at the same time, the fact that we were able to be vulnerable really increased our level of our relationship. So again, those are different reasons why it can be so important to be able to open up. And when you do that, you shine from your heart. It's like your heart vibrates at a higher frequency, at a higher level, and you're able to project love out into your field. Now, what's the difference between surface level vulnerability and true deep level vulnerability? So I'll give you an example. So in the past, if someone had asked me about like my childhood, depending upon how well I knew the person or if it was just small talk or whatnot, I might mention, this would be like super surface level, I might mention all the positive things that happened in my childhood. Because yes, like people experience sometimes, traumatic events or whatnot. However, for most people, it's not like they experience the bad things every single day. Yes, there are some extremes where you hear about, a person being locked in a basement like their whole lives. You do hear about some extreme stuff, but for the average person, they might experience some trauma, and it's usually like spaced in between fun, good events as well. So I might have just talked about like, oh, my childhood, yeah, it was great. X, Y, Z. And then sometimes, if I'm really getting to know somebody, then I might take it like a little bit deeper. And so then I might say, well, there was some like hard times, like my parents didn't have a lot of money, grew up like, I didn't have a lot of advantages, that kind of thing. So I might maybe talk about the scarcity that was there, but I would never talk about the deeper things. It would never go past that surface level. So when you're thinking about truly being vulnerable, it's more of a question, and you might not have anything that happened to you. Hopefully you don't. And so it's not necessarily like, well, I don't have anything like that to share. How can I be vulnerable? So you don't have to have something like that to share. That was just me. That's just like my experience and my level of vulnerability. For you, it might be, we'll go back to using the like good enough example. For you, maybe you're in that new relationship and you're thinking like, oh boy, like this person really excels at this thing over here and I suck at this. And you have that opportunity to be vulnerable and open up and share with that person that maybe you're feeling a little bit insecure. And maybe it's not even total insecurity, like maybe it's just like the situation that me and my boyfriend had of just like, hey, there's that thought, like I know it's not really true, but here it is. Let's put it out in the open. So a lot of it's just putting it out in the open, putting how you truly feel out in the open, sharing from your heart. So the difference between that surface level is like the stuff where you don't feel like your emotions don't get touched. Like there's nothing, you're not going to start crying. There's nothing like preventing you from having your emotions, your emotions being activated. When you're sharing the deeper level stuff, you might get a little bit emotional. Like you might have some emotions coming up, and that's okay. So I think a part of vulnerability is also learning that it's okay to have emotions. It's okay to like let everybody else know that you have emotions, and it's okay to express your emotions. So that's part of I think the whole concept of being vulnerable is being able to just allow yourself to express what's coming up for you. Allow yourself to express what's going on. When we're able to go deep into those emotions, when we're able to like go down into our heart and into our gut and really like feel everything coming up, that's when we're able to be, hey, I'm being vulnerable now. I'm expressing something that I don't necessarily feel comfortable expressing. And that kind of guides you along the surface level to the deeper level stuff. If somebody asks you a question that it should be maybe a little bit difficult for you to answer, and it's not, then it's surface level. If somebody asks you a difficult question and it's kind of harder for you to answer, that's the more deeper vulnerability that you're experiencing there. And really noticing the difference, really noticing like, are you actually being 100% honest with someone? And I don't mean that in certain situations, like I'm not gonna go in for a job interview and be like, yeah, so my mom had this boyfriend this one time. So there are certain situations where obviously you're gonna keep it more surface level. And then if you're in personal growth and development, like I am, for example, then maybe, yeah, you're gonna share your story with an audience. And then the other part of this is, okay, how do you make sure you're just opening up and that you're just not vomiting your story? So there can be another piece to this, which is the part of the vulnerability, which I'm like, okay, I don't know if I can be vulnerable because it feels like I'm just kind of like vomiting all of my garbage onto other people. I feel like I'm just, there was the mindset of I'm not allowed to be vulnerable because I wasn't allowed to tell people what my mom did. So there was the whole concept of like, no, I'm not even allowed to do this. And then there was also the piece of like, it's not safe. But there's also another piece of I also feel bad. Like I felt like I used to feel like I'm, back in that state. Whenever I was in that state, I would feel like I'm just giving everybody here's my garbage, like here's my baggage, like you guys just take this. And so I didn't like feel that was fair to others. Come to find out, it's actually not fair for you to not open up. So going back to the example of my boyfriend, if he was sharing something vulnerable and he was opening up, it kind of wouldn't have been fair if I didn't reciprocate. It wouldn't be fair like if I didn't do the same thing. Now, the difference between it being like you stuck in your story versus just speaking from your heart to let everybody else know, hey, it's okay if you have experiences that weren't that great. It's okay, like your life's not ruined. Like it doesn't have to control your life. Like you don't have to play the victim card and be like, poor me, I can't ever succeed. I won't be successful because my childhood was effed up. Like I can't do it. That's your story. That's going into making it a story. That's going into, okay, well, because all of this stuff happened to me when I was a kid, now I have this story of I can't do it. Like all of this stuff happened. So now going into the future, like I'm not going to be successful. I'm going to end up, not being able to accomplish my goals. So what you want to look at is if you're opening up and being vulnerable, what's the purpose? Like, what is the intention behind it? Why are you sharing your story? Is it to get something from someone? Is it to, oh, please feel bad for me? Or is it to empower someone? Is it to help them go through something that they're going through? So for example, now when I'm sharing this story, when I'm like, okay, you know what? It's time for me to be vulnerable. It's time for me to open up and share my experiences, because if I share my experiences with you, then I can connect with you. If I share my experiences with my students in a live room, I can connect with them And the goal is to be able to help them through whatever it is they're going through. For them to know, like, hey, people go through stuff and it's okay. You can heal from it. You can grow from it. You can learn from it. There's many, I wouldn't necessarily use the term like I'm grateful for the experiences that I had. And honestly, yeah, I am grateful for the experiences that I had. Not grateful that they happened, but grateful that now I can be here with you guys. I can be in my live training room and I can help other people who've experienced similar situations. I can help other people who didn't have the best of childhood. I can help people see, like, this doesn't mean that your life is over. This doesn't mean that you have to stick with that story. So that's the difference between having like it be your story or it being something that is going to be like beneficial and vulnerable and help people. So if you're just going around saying, this is my baggage, like, see my baggage, like, here's my baggage, you guys want some of my baggage? Like, here, take it. Here, this is me, this is me right here. This is my baggage, and I'm gonna vomit it all over you because I'm keeping it as my story, as why I'm not okay. This is why I'm messed up. This is why I'm not successful. This is why I'm not in a relationship. This is why I'm not healthy. This is why, like, I can't because of this. That's when it's your story. That's when the healing needs to happen. Once you're able to get rid of this, then you're able to heal and you're able to use it as a tool to help other people. Yes, for me, all of that stuff is a part of who I am. So it's not like I'm saying, oh, well, this never happened to me, or being like delusional about it. It's a part of who I am. And here's the thing, since I've done work, since I've, healed from all of those experiences, I love who I am. And because those experiences, maybe I wouldn't be me if I didn't have those experiences. That's why, yeah, I am grateful that they happened. Again, not the specific actions that were taken during that time period. However, I do have a gratitude for that because, like I said, I wouldn't be me. I wouldn't be this person standing in front of you right now had I not had those experiences. So instead of them being my story, instead of them being something that I get to play the victim card for, and I get to go, poor me, I can't do anything, I can't succeed in life because all of these things happened to me. Instead of doing that, I get to stand in front of you as an empowered woman, being able to say, hey, there's more to life. There's healing that you can do. And that's me being vulnerable. That's me being 100% vulnerable. So those are the different differences between the different stages of being vulnerable and when it's being vulnerable and when it's you being in your story. Now, the other part of that is how to support someone else when they're being vulnerable. So for example, when my boyfriend was sharing the stuff that he was being vulnerable about, there wasn't that like, you seriously think that? Like, that is so dumb. Why would you even think that? Like, if I had kind of got mad at him or maybe like selfishly got hurt, like, well, how can you think that about me? What kind of person do you think I am? If I would have had maybe some sort of reaction like that, then it wouldn't, then he wouldn't feel comfortable and or safe being vulnerable with me, like in the future. So when someone is being vulnerable with you, just support them through what they're going through, and recognize the difference between, are they just being vulnerable with you or are they telling you their poor me story? So if they're just opening up, if they're speaking from their heart and opening up with you about something that's going on with them, just listen. All you really have to do is just listen. There's not much else you actually have to do. If you just listen. I was one of the YouTube channels that I listen to is the School of Greatness. I'll put a link in the description below. And on there, he's also very vulnerable on his show. It's one of the reasons why I really appreciate him as an interviewer. And I was watching one of his episodes and he was saying something about that when he was learning how to interview people, because that's what his show is about. He mostly interviews people on his show. So he brings guests on and he interviews his guests. And one of the things that he was talking about one of his episodes was about like how he interviews, like what's his interviewing style, what is his, like how he feels like he got successful as an interviewer. And one of the things he said was, I just listen. I've just learned to not talk and to just listen. And he said, like in that particular episode, he was like, and sometimes I feel like I'm still working on that. And he's like, sometimes I feel like, you know, because whenever somebody's telling you something, there's sometimes that feeling of like wanting to interrupt. And not really that you're meaning to, not that you're like, oh, I'm gonna interrupt you now. It's just more of it's a natural thing we do because they're telling you what's going on with them. And a natural tendency for us is to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, me too, and go into whatever's going on with us. And sometimes in that moment, you just have to realize, hold on, they're sharing something with you. They've chosen you for whatever reason. Maybe it's like what happened with me, a new relationship. Maybe they just need somebody to talk to. Maybe they need somebody to open up to. And all they really need you to do is just listen. And one of the things I really like about that YouTuber is that he'll let them go on for a while. And then he asks like one simple, really good question. Some interviewers, they'll ask a question and it's almost as if they start like answering it themselves and then ask another question. And so the person being interviewed then has to answer the first question, kind of pay attention to what they're saying in the middle, and then answer the second question, sometimes a third question. And it can get very difficult to, you know, be interviewed that way because you're having to answer these several different things. And with the School of Greatness, like one of the things that is absolutely amazing with him is that he will listen and then ask a really key question to get the other person to talk a whole bunch more. And it's absolutely fascinating to watch the way he does it. But that's similar for anybody. Whenever anyone is sharing something with you, just listen. It seems so simple. But that's what it is. Like, and also sometimes the monkey mind will start going, even if you don't like accidentally interrupt them and be like, oh yeah, this one time I had blah, 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 blah. Because like I said, your monkey mind, it's in the background saying, oh yeah, me too. And you also kind of want to connect with that person. You want to share. But sometimes that's not the appropriate time for you to share. And yes, your monkey mind's just going on in the background saying, oh yeah, I've had that similar experience. If you can, like take a deep breath and tell the monkey mind, we're listening now. So it's not only just that you don't talk, that you don't interrupt them. You hear them out, you let them tell their story. It's not just that you don't interrupt, it's also in your mind, you try not to interrupt them. Because like I said, sometimes in your mind, you're still interrupting them, even though you're not physically doing it. And when you start to do that, you actually hear them. You actually listen and you can hear a person's heart. You can hear a person's soul speaking. It's absolutely beautiful to do. And so like I said, when you're supporting them, all you have to do is listen. Now there's the other part of it of, okay, well, what if they're just going into their story? What if instead of they're sitting there, you know, being vulnerable, being open, but instead of just a share, it's a, hey, and this is why I can't do X, Y, Z. Or, you know, maybe if you're encouraging them like, hey, you should go out on dates. Like you should go out, you should connect with people, you should do these different things. Like this will help you because maybe they're telling you like, I'm sad, I'm lonely, I'm this, I'm that. And so you're trying to like give them advice, right? Being a good friend or something, trying to give them advice. And instead of them going, oh yeah, okay, well, can you help me set up a dating site, a dating app, or you know, whatever it might be. Instead of them like doing that, maybe they're just not taking action. And you're like, okay, well, why aren't you going out on dates? And then they start telling you a story of all of these like negative things, but it's going to where they're like, oh no, I'm victim, I can't, like their victim card, like I can't. Then that's them telling their story. then that's a little bit of a different situation, because one of the things that can sometimes happen is that you can then start to feed into their story. So then you can start to be like, oh yeah, oh that's true, oh I forgot that happened to you, yeah, maybe you just shouldn't date. You're right. Maybe dating's just, yeah, I don't, we'll figure something else out for you. That can be the other side of it, where you're feeding into their story, especially if they tell you like the same thing over and over again. And that's when maybe there's a suggestion of like, hey, well, okay, I understand that all of this stuff happened, and I get that, and I totally can appreciate you've had all of these experiences, and I've gone on these other dates, like I've personally gone on dates where none of that happened. Our friend so-and-so has gone on dates where none of that happened. So maybe like, let's look at your strategy of the type of people who you're going out on dates with, and maybe direct the conversation to a different way of looking at it, like looking outside of their box, because their baggage, their stuff is like put them in this little box and they can't see outside of the box. Now, if they're just simply sharing something of like, okay, so, you know, this one thing happened on this date this one time, and it's like maybe they were raped or something, but maybe they experienced like an event that was like literally traumatic. That's when you listen. That's when you hear them out. And then that's when you say like, okay, well, are you ready to heal from this? Are you ready to be able to heal so that this is no longer your story? If they're like, yes, connect them with someone who can help them. I'll put a link in the description below about a resource for anyone who is wanting to get help in that area. So I'll put that in the link below, or in the description below. But basically, thinking about this is, if they're sharing something vulnerable with you, just listen. That's all you gotta do. If they're repeatedly sharing a story over and over again, and it's preventing them from going to the next level, if it's preventing them from growing, from experiencing an amazing life, then that's when you want to have a different conversation with them. Because if they're so involved in their story and you care about this person, maybe it's none of your business. It could be, just none of your business. But if you care about the person and want to help them, that's a different conversation. So those are different things about vulnerability. Now, how to vulnerable. So for me, it goes back to, why would I not want to share? What is it that's causing me to not want to share? Those are the different things that I looked at of, okay, I was told I shouldn't share certain things. That's something. I never felt safe sharing. That's another thing. I thought that there's a lot of things that I helped my mom out with whenever she was going through all of the things that we were going through together. And so for me, I thought I had to be the strong one, because in my mind, my mom was dating someone who, as a little kid, I thought, this is not appropriate. Like, how is it possible she's still dating this person? How is it possible she's bringing this person into not only her life, but her young daughter's life? So even as a little kid, I had feelings of this isn't right. This isn't okay. And so in my mind, in my child mind, because she was doing this, I thought, okay, well, she's not strong enough to be able to handle the situation. She's not strong enough to be able to tell him no and kick him out. So I thought I have to be the strong one in my mind. This was my thinking. I had to be the strong one, which meant I can't be vulnerable for that reason either. So for me, finding my vulnerability was letting go of all of those things, letting go of the story, right? Because it was a story, letting go of the story that I wasn't allowed to be vulnerable, letting go of the story that it wasn't safe, letting go of the story that I had created about that I have to be strong and being vulnerable is weak. Letting go of those multiple different faceted stories that I had created in my mind that said vulnerability wasn't okay. For you, this is the part where you get to play around with what's going on in your own mind. You get to discover. Because one of the things that we teach in our live trainings is, that our goals as trainers is not to tell you like what to think. Our goals are to tell you how to think. And during different parts of our training, we'll say stuff like, sometimes we'll read like a book on like the 3 ways to lose weight. And it'll go over like, you do this, and you do this. Well, often what can happen sometimes is whoever the author was that wrote the book, that was their 3 ways. So with them, they did this, and they did this, and it worked. You might have a completely different body style for them. Some people, they're like vegetarians, right? Like they love being a vegetarian and they think it makes them incredibly healthy. Other people are more like paleo. The paleo diet's like, it's not the opposite of a vegetarian, but of all the diets, it probably is mostly the opposite because you're eating a lot more meat, very few vegetables. So it's probably one of the closest to like, those two being opposites. For some people, they do really good with vegetarian. Some people, their bodies, if they go vegetarian, they bloat, they become very unhealthy, they become very lethargic. It does not work for them. So those type of people go more with the paleo diet. If I gave someone whose body resonates with the paleo diet, if I gave them book on how to be a vegetarian and taught them to be a vegetarian, it wouldn't work out for them. Instead, you can do what we call chunking up, which means just taking something from like the details. So the details would be, oh, here's all the vegetarian recipes you need to do, or here's all the paleo recipes you need to do, into a broader category of eat healthy. So instead of like teaching you, here's how to be vegetarian, I would more teach you, here's how to be healthy within your own body. So it's the same thing with this. I'm giving you examples for me that worked, like my steps that I took to be open and vulnerable. And now you can take that concept and take it to what applies for you. So again, my steps were realizing this is the different stories that I was telling myself. These are the different stories I was telling myself on why I can't be vulnerable. And like I said, those stories where it's not safe, I would be seen as weak. I wouldn't be strong if I was doing it, and several other little things, right? So what are your stories? What are your reasons why you can't be vulnerable? Or what are your reasons why you can't support someone in being vulnerable? And I'll tell you this, if you can't support someone in being vulnerable, if every time you see someone being vulnerable, maybe they're sharing something and they start crying, if you see that as weak, if you see that as, oh my goodness, like here's this person, they're telling all of these things that happened to them, they're just like doing all of this and they're crying now, and you're like, that is so weak, like this is not appropriate, they shouldn't be doing that. Guess what? You probably have a problem, an issue with being vulnerable yourself. You probably think it's not okay to have emotions, or perhaps not that it's not okay to have emotions, but it's not okay to show your emotions, not okay to be able to allow others to experience your emotions. And I say this not because I'm like, you can't be vulnerable, it's you. No, I'm not saying it because of that. I'm saying it because it's me. It was me. So whenever I would see someone, certain circumstances, I'd be like, oh my gosh, yeah, like, it's okay. Like if it was like a one-on-one thing, then of course I've always been the one my friends come to and they're able to be vulnerable and they're able to cry on my shoulder and all the other stuff. But if someone was like speaking in front of a crowd and they started sharing something that didn't necessarily have to do with like what was going on, but they were opening up and they were sharing something like within them, I was a little bit judgmental. I was a little bit like, oh, okay, everybody's gonna see you as weak now. And that's because that was me, that was how I felt inside. It wasn't true. No one else saw them as weak. Everybody else, I was looking around and I'm like, everybody seems okay with this. Maybe it is okay to share. Maybe it is okay to open up. But I thought in like a moment of, ooh, you're doing this in front of a crowd? I don't think you can do that. That's scary. Like, what are you doing right now? So steps to be vulnerable is to look into yourself and ask yourself, well, why not? Why can't I? What's preventing me? Ask yourself, what's preventing me from being vulnerable? I've shared with you some of the stuff that was preventing me. So what's preventing you? What's preventing you from opening up and being vulnerable? Because like I said, if you don't, good luck. All right, thank you all for watching. And as always, choose love in all that you do. Mahalo. Let me pause and get some water. I'm really thirsty. Let's see, can I? No, hold on. Does it look like I caught it? It would be funny if it doesn't. I don't know, we'll find out. Now, what's the difference between surface? Fuck. Try this again, do over.